Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole here with another video. Today I'm going to talk about how to use one of these machines correctly. If used incorrectly, it will become a grinder, and that would mean that you're going to grind your teeth away, which is a very expensive process, not to mention they can be turned blue and change the temper. So what we want to do is show you some techniques so that you're using your machine as a sharpener, not as a grinder. Now, the definition between a grinder is that if we have a look over there, I've got two bench grinders, and that's what they're used for, to grind metal away. The white wheel that you see there is used, it's a much finer wheel, and it's used for sharpening chisels and things like that there. So when we get a chainsaw sharpener, we want to use it to sharpen the chain, not grind away the chain. And that's the mistake a lot of people make, that they use the machine incorrectly and they just grind their chain away. If you are using the machine correctly, you should be grinding about 0.1 to 0.2 of a millimetre between grinds. So that being the case, the serviceability of a chainsaw chain that's approximately, say, a 3/8 chain is approximately 10 millimetres in length, and you would use about 7 millimetres of that tooth before you would discard that. So you've got 7 millimetres of tooth that you can grind away. And if you're grinding between 0.1 and 0.2 of a millimetre to sharpen it, you're going to last 35 times plus. So yeah, you could quite easily get 40, 45 sharpenings per chain, provided you do it the right way. So what is the right way? First of all, let's start with the wheel. They're cheap aluminium oxide wheels. They do the job. A lot of people complain about them. I don't complain about them. I use them properly. They work fine. Now, the other thing is, periodically they suggest that you put a radius on the wheel and you use a radius card like that, and then you can check. I only ever check that every now and then. Lucky if I use a diamond file to dress that, only very, very occasionally. And the reason is, I grind quite a lot of chains on this grinder. That means that all those chains and all the teeth on those chains are ground to that profile of that wheel. If that wheel is not perfect U-shape, then all those chains have that profile on them. The moment that you redress this stone, that profile will not match all those existing chains that you ground on, and you're going to have to grind off excess metal until this profile matches the ground profile on the chain that you're about to grind. That would normally mean that you're going to grind excess metal away. So you could grind an extra 0.2 of a millimetres of tooth just because you wanted that nice and round and perfect. So if it looks okay, I never touch it. I do use the card occasionally just to check. So that's one area that if you constantly dress the stone, that new stone has to create a new profile in the new chain or the old chain that you've got, therefore reducing the amount of life per tooth. So that's one way that it reduces it. The second way is that when you get a brand new chain, and we'll see whether we can zoom in and see this, is that the profile that's on a brand new chain usually will never match the wheel. And this is called hurricane chain, and as you can see, it comes to a very sharp point, and that's certainly not going to match this wheel. So there's another reason. Now, when you can lose up to a millimetre quite easily. So That's 10 millimeters in length. By the time it gets its first grind, it's going to be just under 9 millimeters. You'll lose a good millimeter off that. So that's one thing. That's why I don't like to buy chains that have weird full chisel points on them. Try and keep them standard if possible. That way I'm not wasting a millimeter on the first grind. So there's a millimeter gone on that particular type of chain. Okay, angles. This is where that if you constantly changing angles, again, you're going to grind excess metal away to no advantage. 30 degrees here is the most commonly used angle worldwide. So if you're using 30 degrees, you're using what most other people are using. Okay, we'll just briefly talk about, say, your 35 degrees. 35 degrees is used maybe for pine, very, very soft wood. The more aggressive you go, sure, it's going to cut quicker, but it won't last as long. It'll dull much quicker. 25 degrees, so 25 degrees is used in a lot of countries that have what they refer to as frozen wood. Frozen wood is just living in a climate that has sub-zero temperatures, and you're going to use a chainsaw to cut into that wood, and you can find that it's very difficult to cut into, and you could blunten a chain at 30 degrees much, much quicker. So people tend to grind those, or sharpen those, I should say, at 25 degrees. So 30 degrees, I would say most of, I'd say 90% of chains out there would be all ground at that. Now, that is what we refer, for those people that beginners there may be watching this, 30 degrees is this angle that you see on top of the tooth when you're looking down on it. So this is referred to the top plate cutting angle, 30 degrees. Okay, the next adjustment is the adjustment on the back. So you'll notice that the grinder is sitting at an angle like this, the wheel, that's at 60 degrees, 90 degrees being straight, so it's tilted over to the 60 degree position. What that technical name is called top plate cutting angle. The top plate cutting angle is the angle that the grinding wheel comes in on the tooth. You'll see that beveled edge there. That's the 60 degree angle. This is called a compounded beveled angle, because you've got one angle here, which is when you viewed from the top, and when you view from here, you've got another angle here. So it's a double angled tooth, and that's what it is. Normally 60 degrees is used worldwide. I don't want to get into, I don't want to go into explanations where to use 50 or 65 or 55. It becomes the same thing, that if you use these angles and become more aggressive, whether you're using 35 degrees here or whether you're using 55 degrees on here, which will be much more aggressive, the more aggressive you go, the quicker it blunts. Believe me, 60 degrees on here and 30 degrees on here will get you out of trouble just about on any timber that's out there. You can't go wrong. My point is that if you're going to play around from 30 degrees to 25 degrees and you're going to grind your chain from going from 30 or going from 25 to 30 or vice versa, whichever way you go, you're going to lose at least a half a millimeter during that process. The same thing that if you adjust this from 55 degrees or 50 degrees and back to 60, because you're changing that angle, it needs to be reground. You're going to lose more metal off that tooth. So, as I said, 90% of people worldwide would use 60 degrees and 30 degrees here. So therefore, if you don't touch these settings and you set them up on 30 degrees and 60 degrees and you don't keep refacing the wheel, then most likely your chainsaw sharpener will remain a sharpener. It'll just be used taking minimal metal off, anywhere between 0.1 and 0.2 of a millimeter. If you constantly dress the wheel up, changing the angles here, then I would refer to it as a chainsaw grinder. You'll be grinding your teeth away totally unnecessarily. So that's what you need to refrain from doing. Dress the wheel occasionally. And when I say occasionally, maybe 30, 40 chains. If you're doing 30, 40 chains and you're only taking 0.1 of a millimetre off, this wheel does not need to be dressed a lot. If you're really grinding into your wheels and changing all your settings, and you're taking up to a millimetre off your chain, then yes, you're going to be using this grinding wheel a lot more, and it will need to be dressed more frequently. So if you want to play around with all the settings, go ahead, but you'll find out that you'll be wearing your chains away much quicker. And yes, this will be in the classification of a chainsaw grinder, not a chainsaw sharpener. So what I'm trying to tell you is how to get the best bang for buck out of your chain. You don't want to be only sharpening it 10 times and saying, oh, I've got to get a new chain. You want to be doing at least 35, 40 sharpenings, light sharpenings, only taking between 0.1 and 0.2 off maximum. Okay, the next culprit that will take more metal off your tooth unnecessarily is setting the backstop incorrectly. By that, I'm meaning that you're pushing, and we'll just do that process now. So the process that I use is, and you may have heard it, they'll say, oh, pull the wheel down, move, adjust the backstop so that it just touches the wheel. Well, I have it a little bit different than just touch the wheel. I have it so that it barely touches the wheel, and I'll show you why. So this is, you can see that now. I can spin that wheel, and you just heard it touch on the high spot. All grinding wheels will have a high spot. They'll never ever spin perfectly dead straight. Doesn't matter what grinding wheel you've got. There's always a little bit of wheel run out. So that's a little high spot. That is how you set that up. And I'll show you why. So if I turn that grinder on now, lock that tooth into position with the cam lock, it's going to barely grind the tooth. We'll just do another tooth. Now that's all you need. Now I'll bring that grinding wheel down again, and look at that. There's virtually nothing. Why is that so? Well, quite simply, one of the advantages of these grinders, I'll just turn this off, is they have a little pin that runs through here, and there's a little bit of movement. You can see that head moving a little bit. When you pull it down, the movement is limited. All the weight of the grinder is leaning that way. So the weight of the motor and the weight of the head and the movement that's in the arm leans down that way. So when you pull it down, it's all leaning that way. So if you hold this down with your hand and pull this down, it is not really touching it's barely touching the tooth. If I put a bit of side pressure and move it that way, it'll start to grind. I'm hardly putting any pressure on it. And you can put your finger on that tooth, it is lukewarm. It's really that simple. So what we'll do is, and I want to show you on this particular tooth, if we can zoom right in there. I can't see it very good here, but I want to measure that tooth, so I'll get the digital caliper out. I want to measure that tooth, grind it, and do a measurement, and hopefully it's around the 0.2 millimeters. So there's a little blue dot on there, you can just see it. We'll do a couple of measurements. So we've got 493, 496, 489. It's around the 490 mark. Okay. So remember that 490. Let's put that into position. Start the grinder. I'll leave the light on and leave it running. Maybe we can actually see the difference here. 483, 480. See whether you can see that. So we've barely taken 0.1 of a millimeter off that. And that's my whole point, and we'll have a look at that tooth. Hopefully we can see that, so that's it there. Ain't nothing wrong with that grind. So even if we're to look at another one, that was a beautiful and sharp. Yeah, that's nice and sharp. So look, they're all like that anyway. Look. Make sure you also don't grind down. You can see you grind down to the bottom there on the gullet. Don't grind down any deeper than that. So hopefully, if we're just going to briefly recap, what I'd like to say is that the machine is a chainsaw sharpener. It's purely used to sharpen the chain. If used incorrectly, it becomes a chainsaw grinder. And the difference is that if it's a chainsaw grinder, it's going to grind your teeth away at a rate that's not really acceptable. If it's a sharpener, that's all it's going to do. It's going to sharpen the chain, not grind it away. It's like a butcher's knife. They use a steel, it's called a steel, it's a metal rod with splines on it. And you sharpen the butcher's knife. And a meat cleaver, you could use an oil stone. And that's what they do with a lot of knives. They use oil stones. Obviously, you can't use an oil stone to grind a chainsaw tooth. So you use the aluminium oxide wheel, but you grind as least as possible to make it sharp. Now, a lot of people who use files turn around and say, oh, look, I don't like chainsaw grinders, they blue the metal. I used to blue the metal when I had no experience using a chainsaw sharpener. Once I worked it all out and figured out that you barely need the wheel to contact and you could use a little bit of side pressure to influence more grinding, my sharpening technique improved dramatically. My chains lasted a lot longer. And as I said, don't play around with all the angles. Don't dress the wheel up, only very occasionally, and you'll find out, yes, you can grind 0.1 of a millimetre off, between 0.1 and 0.2. Your chains will last a lot longer. You will not blue them. They will come out very, very good because you're not using excessive grinding force on them. And that's probably the message that the final point to make is, when you do sharpen your chainsaw chain, make sure that you adjust your backstop so that the wheel barely touches. Can't emphasize that more. That's the secret. Making sure that the wheel barely touches. If it touches too much, it's going to grind too much. I've done an experiment, and I could briefly do it now, that I've got an old chain, and I've got it here. Have I got it? Yeah, it's laying around here. I'll grab it out. I'm going to deliberately set up this old chain, and we'll grind. I want to set it up so that we're grinding too much off it. And the reason that I can do that is, okay, so I've set that up now, and it only took 2 seconds. That the grinding wheel, I can still move the grinding wheel, but it's too much. Now, we'll count how many seconds it takes before there's no more sparks coming out of the wheel. And we'll use the tapping motion, and we'll just count how long it takes before it extinguishes, before it stops grinding. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Not many sparks there, but look, I could still actually keep my finger on that. See that? Virtually stopped now. So that was, I don't know, nearly half a minute, off and on, off and on. And it didn't turn blue. I'll actually prove that to you. No good. Let's see whether we can zoom in on that. There it is there. Not one bit of blue on that tooth. Let's try and zoom in a bit better than that. There it is there. So if we were to set that up the way that I set that up before, and then we'll do the opposite. We'll actually count. Hopefully we only get about 10 seconds. So we'll just bring this down. I can't see very good, so hang on, just hang on. Okay, so that's barely touching the wheel. I'm expecting that would probably grind for about 10 seconds. And I could keep my finger on that, no problem. So, and again, it's not going to be blue, it's going to be... So, all those people out there that say about bluing the teeth, the only way you blue the teeth is that you're taking an excessive amount of metal off the chain, around anywhere from 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter. It'll turn blue if you hold this down at a fast rate. In other words, holding it down, slowly holding it down, too much time. Look, I hope that really helps, because if you can improve your grinding method and your technique, you'll find out that your chains will last a lot longer, and you'll be able to get up to 40 sharpenings per chain because you took the time and effort and you're not fiddling around with the angle here or the angle there or dressing the wheel constantly. So a lot of people think that they need to dress the wheel every single time that they do a chain. So if you've been doing that, please stop doing that, because all you're going to do is take off much more metal off your chains. Look, thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up, and comments are welcome. Bye for now.